Hey everybody, this is Jon Croft with Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft, and I am Jon Croft. And Rebecca's here. How are you, Rebecca?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, great. You're coming in great. And wow, it's what a unique night. It's been a unique week. And then we have a hurricane bearing down on all of us in the southeastern United States. Wow, people need prayer right now across the state. People need prayer in Georgia and in Tennessee and in North Carolina. My goodness. Yeah, I was just watching the news like right before this, and like a dam broke in eastern Tennessee, and there's a ton of flooding up there in Asheville and in Gatlinburg and all these places. It's crazy. I feel bad for those people up there because they're not used to this kind of thing that we're more used to down here with hurricanes. And a lot of people didn't expect to be so destructive here either. And so a lot of people need prayer, and so we want to hold them up in prayer. But tonight we're going to be talking about St. George and the Dragon as well as some other things. How about you, Rebecca? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Um, God is good. I'm good. All is good.
Hmm. I already asked you that, didn't I? That's okay. I like to ask you that question. It's, you know. But did you have any questions for me?
Yes, what media experiences have you been having this week?
What media experiences have I been having this week? I love that. Yes. So I'll be sharing a video that I saw just today about Am I Racist, the movie, where Matt Walsh responds to some progressive Christians on the subject. And so I guess I'll share that now. Okay, so this is a Matt Walsh video where he responds to a gentleman named Phil Vischer, who was the one of the people who worked on Veggie Tales in the 90s or something, in the early 2000s maybe as well, and with two other people with him on their little podcast. But Matt responds to some stuff they say. Let's hear what he says.
So I happened to see a clip posted to Twitter by the account Woke Preacher Clips. This is a conversation on a podcast called Holy Post, hosted by Phil Vischer, best known as one of the creators of Veggie Tales. Vischer has gone woke in recent years, or maybe always was, I don't know, but it's no great surprise either way that he's apparently not a fan of mine. And he's joined on this episode by a guy named Pastor Mike Erie and another guy named Sky Jathani, who is now a Christian speaker, I guess, and was once also a pastor. So these three brilliant minds came together to talk about the film, a film that, as far as I can tell, none of them have seen. Let's listen.
The film lampoons diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and features Walsh posing as a DEI expert to expose and ridicule actual DEI experts in a Borat-style subterfuge. And if there's anything we need more in the Christian world, it's Borat-style subterfuge.
Now, I'm going to let them continue, but I do want to interject here to say that
Well, I'm not going to let them continue, but yeah, so this is the kind of stuff you hear when people don't like conservatives speaking their mind on culture. Um, you get a lot of kind of like, well, we're Christians, so we're really holy and we have the right opinion on this. And so they're going to start talking about culture as though they know something about culture. And but from this other school of thought, right, which is a religious school of thought. And one thing that we've learned in the last few years, many of us just in the last who knows how long, but something that I've known for a while, which is that a lot of churches and people in the Christian community are not, especially the evangelical Protestant community, are not very good at culture. They're just not good at doing it. And I think that they'd prefer that other Christians were like them and just stayed out of the culture. And so a lot of complaining goes on when other Christians kind of step out of line and use their freedoms in Christ to try to do something that they think God is telling them to do. And so they get offended, and they get emotional and sometimes even high and mighty about the kind of stuff other Christians should be talking about in public. And from where I come from, I have freedom in Christ, so I'm allowed to engage in culture. Even if you want to use this word culture war, I'm allowed to do that. Even if you want to get into politics, I'm allowed to do that. Even if you wanted to make an offensive movie, you're allowed to do that as a Christian. So yeah, let's continue. I guess let's continue on then, because there's more to be said here.
Yeah, actually, Phil, we do need more of that in the Christian world. Comedy, satire, using the left's own methods against them. That is, without question, something we need more of. But these three men disagree. So let's get to their argument. Even though they didn't see the movie and haven't the slightest damn clue what they're even talking about, still, let's continue.
We don't know who's right, but it sparked a conversation online among Christians saying, is that okay? And Denny Burke wrote a piece. Actually, I was reading from Denny Burke's piece, who's the head of the Center for Biblical Womanhood and Manhood, so ultra conservative. But he pushed back and said, I think it's wrong to use subterfuge and deception just, for culture war battles. And other people said, oh, what, do you think it's wrong to lie to the Nazis that you've got Jews in your attic?
I knew that was coming.
These are serious times. It warrants serious measure. So you both are one current and one.
Wow. So he had a lot of key words there. There's this idea of subterfuge, and there's this idea of deception. Deception, I think, is the key word here, because they're going to make the claim that Matt Walsh is being dishonest and therefore unchristian. Obviously, they're using the word deception here. And so, but what they're not going to do is back that up. They won't give you any evidence that he's being deceptive. And they won't warrant their use of World War II in here either. There's not warranted for us to use this heated rhetoric and this kind of like clear delineation between good and evil. And yet that's what's being invoked here. So it kind of gets more and more absurd as we go along.
Pastor, I want you to tell me, when is it okay for me to lie to achieve what I consider to be a good? Mike Erie, go.
Well, I'm lying that I'm enjoying this.
I want to interject one more time briefly before we hear them make their compelling case against the movie they didn't watch. I just want you to notice the tone. You see the guy on the bottom left? I think that's Sky, with his head in his hands, rolling his eyes. Pastor Erie is flippant and dismissive. So is Phil Vischer, the VeggieTales guy. The whole thing is so beneath them. It's just so silly. It's absurd that they're even lowering themselves to discuss my film. That's the general tone which pervades all the rest of what we're about to hear and what came before the clip we just played. It's also the attitude that these types of people usually have when discussing me or my work. But notice something. They're discussing my work. I'm now discussing them discussing my work, but I'm not discussing any of their work. Nobody.
And we're discussing him discussing them discussing his work. You like that? That's pretty good, huh? This is how the internet works now. I think it's amazing, isn't it?
React to reaction videos.
Yes, I'm reacting to the reaction to the reaction.
Respond to the response videos.
Yes. And some of this stuff I don't have to play because Matt Walsh is giving a bit of a typical response here, but it's not that I disagree with his response, but it's like, it's kind of low-hanging fruit. It's like these guys, Sure, Phil Vischer worked on VeggieTales, and we love VeggieTales from like 20 years ago, right? But Matt Walsh's point, obviously, is that these guys aren't in the culture space. They're not working in culture. And it's easy, right, to throw stuff at someone from a nice, safe distance, when you're not doing anything. So, this is one of the reasons I never wanted to do reviews of other filmmakers' films. It's kind of like, I'm not a reviewer. That's not what I do, and so I call it analysis, and I'm very generous to people when I do analysis. But it's important to have, I think, to walk a mile in someone's shoes, to really get a clearer perspective on what someone's doing. And but there is something I'm gonna skip some of what he says here, but let's see where we are now.
Engage in a culture war.
Yes. That's why I'm here. I'm here because they invoked the word culture war. And so as we've mentioned here, and I actually put this in the title of this show because this is why I wanted to use this video, and this is why it's been important to me, and why I wanted to mention it, because we define the culture war here for you in a clear way for everyone to understand, because people are just using it higgledy-piggledy, that term, and they don't even understand what it means. They think it's a face value term. They think it's two types of cultures battling it out for dominance. And that is not true at all. That is not what's happening. When you describe the culture war, what you're describing is a political activity where you're supporting one side of the political aisle over another. And that has almost nothing to do with culture. So in a way, we're going full circle to the beginning of this show, episode 1, Building Conservative Culture, and we define our terms of what culture war means. I think we did that in episode 2 as well, and maybe 3 or 4 or 5, one of those other ones. But early on, we were talking about what the definition of Kulturkampf is, what culture war is, where it comes from, and why we should not engage in it, right? But it's not evil or wrong to engage in it. It's just that from my perspective as an artist and as someone who understands culture, I hope, you have to understand that culture war is not having anything to do with culture. So let's listen to what he says about culture war.
Yep, that is the dividing line. Absolutely, that is exactly the dividing line. That is very true.
So you agree? You're going on record to say you agree with Matt Walsh.
In one very narrow respect, you cannot follow the Sermon on the Mount and engage in a culture war. Yes, so there is a dividing line. Absolutely.
You cannot listen to the Sermon on the Mount and engage in a culture war. That's an incredibly unfair statement. I don't think a pastor can say that to someone. That's almost like saying Christians, it's wrong, it's sinful for a Christian to engage in politics. That's what he's saying. So, if Christ had an issue with any of us engaging in some kind of profession, don't you think he would tell us that? So, and clearly it's not the case that you can't worship or serve God from a place in power. That's clearly not the case. So now if they are defining culture war as an act within culture, that's even more the case. That there's nothing wrong with you engaging in culture, right? But what they're asserting is that, and here's the thing about this issue, the disconnect happening here. Leftists and people on the left, which these guys are clearly on the left, right? Because they have an issue. They think conservatives are being extreme. Leftists understand that culture war is a political activity, and people on the right do not understand that. They think this is a cultural activity. And so they're engaging full force to try to do cultural things, which I agree with, right? I agree with it, with engaging it culturally. And that's what this show really is about. It's about delineating between the two of these things. Are you engaging in politics now, or are you engaging in culture now? If you're engaging in culture, just don't call it a culture war, because that's not what it is. It's just engaging in culture. It's building culture. It's loving culture. It's creating art. It's creating music. And your opinion, whether it's political or not, is going to come out in that art because that's something you believe in. That's what we have in a free speech country where we have freedom of beliefs, freedom of religion. Just the idea that Christians, if these guys say they're Christians, that Christians have a problem with a free society that allows you to act in the culture and talk about your religion and your beliefs freely in this culture is mind-boggling to me, that a Christian would not be okay with other Christians expressing their faith through culture. It's mind-numbingly ridiculous to say that another Christian can't express their own faith, or that anyone for that matter, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, can't express their faith, the faith of their own religion. It's mind-numbingly ridiculous, So, and then to say that you can't talk politics is also ridiculous. But understand that what a culture war is a battle between two political sides as it comes to who will dominate the culture. And so that's really what culture war is. It's an assertion that a political side can dominate the culture, they have the right to do that. And so what we need to do is, instead of go along with that nonsense of playing culture war games in politics and calling it culture, what we do instead is say, you know what? You can keep your politics over there. We're going to engage in culture. We're going to just freely talk about our beliefs. And those are going to intersect with politics. Those are going to intersect with religion. And how could it be any different? That's what freedom of speech is. But understand, if you're going to sign up for a culture war, that what you're basically buying into is the notion that your political side will have influence and dominance over the culture. So these guys, both sides, do not understand, right? Matt Walsh is correct in engaging the culture. That's what he's doing. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. But he's using culture war incorrectly, the term. But not a huge deal, right? It's just someone using a term incorrectly, right? I mean, he might fight and have ferocious battles over this. And the problem is a lot of people on the left can call him out and defeat him on this argument because he doesn't know what he's talking about as it comes to the term culture war. But where the left is wrong is in every other way. They're trying to say you can't engage in culture war. They're trying to say you can't engage in culture. They're trying to say Christians can't just talk about these things or make movies. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But congrats, you understand that culture war is political. I hand it to you, that you understand these definitions. This is like the Pharisees straining at a gnat, right? And swallowing a camel. That's the equivalent here that we have. So I'm ashamed of these guys, these three guys, like being snarky. I mean, Phil Vischer should be making more culture instead of being on a podcast with these guys. I'm not going to be rude about them. Like, they're doing the best job they think they can be doing, but I think it's kind of shameful that they think that they have the right to tell Matt Walsh he can't do this. It's just so obnoxiously ridiculous that people think you're not allowed to talk this way. It is extremely progressive, and it's ridiculous. And these guys need to stop with all the politicking, because it's shameful, you know. So what I see, and not to just dismiss the rest of that there's other good stuff in that video, by the way. But what I see is people in the church who they don't want conservatives engaging in culture or politics, but they themselves will do that. In fact, they will use their cultural and political platform to say that conservatives shouldn't use their platform, which is so obnoxiously hypocritical. I mean, you have to have no human conscience and no like consideration for others to believe that. Like it's so sad that in the church today we're told, oh no, don't engage in politics, you know, but we will. Right? I mean, and in some ways you have to understand because in their mind, they're not engaging in politics, right? But they will see you do it. And so, like any normal human being that has faults, makes mistakes, and is blind to their own behavior, right? Which we all can do this, right? We all can kind of be a little blind to our own behavior and not realize that, like those three guys, and not realizing that what they're doing is political. That they don't realize that they're doing political commentary right now. So it's really sad, and I've seen Christian pastors engaging in this political talk on the pulpit, on the left, and whether it's feminism or what have you, they have their own political view that they're not willing to separate themselves from. But then they'll say on the other side of their mouth, we shouldn't engage in politics here, we're not going to do that. So, and the funny thing is I've actually recently talked to a pastor about how, yeah, we shouldn't in the church engage in politics too much, right? But there's a context to that statement, right? The context is to say, we're not going to endorse as a church this view or that view or this policy or that policy necessarily. That to me is not engaging in politics in that context. But there's another context, which is to say, I have opinions, right? And those opinions, when I go into the church, those opinions intersect with morality. And that morality could take shape as a political policy. I could talk about life, right? I could talk about a pro-life position in the church, but not call it pro-life, not say, oh, I'm for this bill or this candidate. But how can someone say I shouldn't talk about the sanctity of life in a church? That's just, so in a more broad sense, of course you can talk about politics in a church. But in a very specific sense, what you're doing is binding the consciences of other Christians when you say, I'm a pastor and our church should be doing this politically. Now you're saying all the people in your church who just heard you are sinners or something if they don't take that position. And even if you say, oh no, you can vote that way, it doesn't matter, because you've already made it clear that you think this is a terrible position to take. So that's really why you can't do it, you know. And so in some ways, I agree that it's very difficult and hairy for pastors right now because things get so charged. But I think what they have to understand is that the Bible is the Bible, and God is God, and truth is truth. And sure, there's a lot of political rhetoric out there, and sometimes these debates about what's true intersect with those things. But I think if we are careful to say things that are relevant to the church now as it comes to spiritual matters, and if we kind of like carefully avoid endorsements of specific political positions, I think it's a smart thing to do right now for pastors to do that. So, but what are we here for, right? We're here for culture. And this is another reason this is such an important thing, because this can help pastors as well. What they have to understand is that we don't really engage in the culture war. What we engage in is real culture. And so what they have to understand is that they need to be okay with engaging in culture. They need to be okay with that. To not be okay with that is not a supportable position in the church. To not be okay with freedom of expression, artistic expression, even if it does intersect to some degree in politics, which art is going to do that, right? Movies do that in places. So they have to be okay with cultural expression. And then they have to understand how to avoid very specific political statements and endorsements in their church. And, so that they're not, stepping on their flock, unfairly. And this again, this isn't to say that pastors can't have discussions with individuals in the church and give their own opinion or even endorsement in some situations. But I think that they're going to have to explain a lot in order to bring that around to the moral position and getting people to understand why they endorse this, you know? So, but I think generally speaking, they shouldn't do that. Generally speaking, their job is to protect their flock spiritually, and their job is to, feed them with spiritual food, right? The way Christ taught Peter, feed my lambs. And when we engage in politics to a certain degree, especially when there's so much heated rhetoric, they need to understand that they could be stepping into a minefield of condemnation, whether it's aimed at them or they're inadvertently aiming it at someone else. They have to understand, and these three guys, they need to understand this too. If they're going to be pastors and stuff, they need to understand that this language that they're using is not, that's literally what they're doing. They're engaging in not very careful language to protect their flock, because many of their flock could be conservative. And now that flock feels condemned by all their language in this podcast. So we don't need to be like unnecessarily alienating people from our church if they happen to engage in different politics. Right? So culture is a place to talk about these things. Art is a place to talk about these things with less threatening rhetoric. Because a lot of it is about the rhetoric. It's about this heated rhetoric that becomes like almost to the point of violence, right? Or like judging your neighbor. And we have to really avoid that as Christians. So I would even recommend some Christians just staying off social media entirely because there's so much heated rhetoric and you can get into a debate and discussion that, and you think this is going to be a productive discussion or something. And 90% of the time it's not. And you feel bad about yourself. Like, why did I say that to this person? This is a human being. I'm treating them like, a binary code on my phone. I'm not treating them. I'm treating them like they're this little icon, that not like they are a person. And so if anything, pastors need to be talking about staying off social media, right? Than they do their political opinion or anything like that. You know, there's a lot of issues that pastors really should be talking about that they're generally not talking about. But um, so yes, and I would love to hear people's opinions on this because I know a lot of people, a lot of friends. I have a lot of friends of mine who are very frustrated about things right now politically and even in the church because what they're seeing is this big disconnect because from what they're seeing in our community and what this other person is seeing or what their community is seeing. And so they're trying to like understand why like what are we going to do about this? And if the church doesn't engage in politics, where does that leave our country? you know so do you have any thoughts about this, honey?
Um,
It's very difficult to approach.
I am a big fan of people supporting each other and looking for the good in what people are doing. And I don't know those guys in the video, and I don't know Matt Walsh very well, but I like when people want to, you know, expose the truth. I like that.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I think there's one message. There's one message in the church that I'm interested in.
I know what you're going to say.
And it's Jesus. He's endlessly interesting. We can talk about him forever, and he's enough.
Yeah.
And he's the King of Kings. And um, oftentimes I feel like it's turned into a morality club, which I think is going back to something you were saying a little bit earlier, um, where people in certain Christian communities are just pointing out faults in other people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this attitude of um, looking down on someone because you don't approve of their expression of of Christianity. And yeah, I just don't think that's the point. The
No.
point isn't to just take Jesus's words and make like a new um set of 10 commandments, like we're not making a new mitzvah. We're not making like a new rule book based on
Mm-hmm.
all the things that Jesus said. Instead, we're engaging with Jesus as a person, as a man, right? This is God who became a man. And so we're learning about who he is and what he did and why he did it, not just pointing out other people and saying, you didn't do the Jesus thing right. And
Well, let me ask you, instead of asking you like all the things you're interested, because I know your answer here, and I love your answer, but you have to understand that when people see these kinds of videos, or when people watch Matt Walsh's movie, or when people go to church, and they hear someone talk about politics, what is like, does this kind of turn you off? You know, like, what do you think about that person? Yeah.
Um, does it turn me off? Well, it's not my main interest.
Yeah.
But it's not like I like people. Like I really like people. So if I see a person that's really passionate about a subject in that kind of environment, in a
Mhm.
conservative environment, in a Christian environment, then I'm listening
Mhm.
like wow, here's a person that Jesus loves, and here's a person that is passionate about something, and God is enthusiastic about them and their passion. And so yeah, like I'm not a huge fan of politics personally. um
Well, I'll save you from having to, like strain to like gain some interest in the subject. I have some envy for you because I'm glad that you are ignorant of so many of these political things and want to remain so. And I think I'm glad that I guess many people on X like myself and people who talk politics, we would call someone like you a normie. Is like she's such a normie. She doesn't really. And you know what? Good. Um, I hope that 99% of Americans are normies about this and that they are not interested and don't know what's going on in our country. But I hate to say it, but there's, a lot of the Revolutionary War was fought by a small percent of the population who knew what was going on. And because those people suffered and died and were aware of what was going on and worked to protect their country and their colonies, those other normies got to have life and got to live a normal life. And so it's good on both sides. I'm glad that there are people who do not care about the subject, but I do think in general, like we need people to care. We need enough people to care so that their society is protected and so that their family and their friends and the other people who want to spend their time doing other things in life, right? They want to be doing other things that make a difference, you know, because we need both kinds of people. But I do think it's, that I'm glad that these are things you don't care about. And you know, and in some ways I wish I didn't care about this stuff either. Truth be told, I, when we talk about politics, I'm like, I wish we could just be talking about art and culture and music and film. You know, that's really the stuff I like. That's really the stuff that gets me more heated up in a way that's good passion, not the bad kind of passion where you're like, ah, getting heated, but it's the good kind of warmed up and heated up. You know what I mean? It's just like, yeah, that's just more interesting to me. So, we can move on from this, but I just wanted to mention that because churches may have difficulty right now with how to relate to this subject because it's the election season and so many people are heated up about it and are aware that things are rough out there. And I'm not a fan of the politics happening now. I'm sure grateful for our governor, and he's been making things really good for us. We're able to send we're able to homeschool all three of our kids at home because of our governor. We're able to do lots of things we wouldn't be able to do just a few years ago. Um, so politics does have an effect. When you have a really good politician in office and they're being responsible and ethical and honest, and they're applying their ethical principles, their moral principles to their job, the people benefit from that. we really benefit from Ron DeSantis here. And we, like, I think we should thank God for people like him more often in our country, and focus on the good, positive people instead of the negative stuff out there. Um, I've talked also here on certain political issues, and some of them are very important issues to me. And it also enters into my cultural endeavors, because I feel that some of these issues are important enough to where we need to make art about it. We need to make movies and films and books and, like whatever we can do to make a difference in the culture. And I've talked about the abolition movement and how Wilberforce and people like him in the UK in the 1800s worked to talk about the slave trade in the UK. And because they did that for 20 years and tried to make a difference in the culture, think of the millions of people who benefited from that, you know, and not just the African folks, but the people in the UK who did not see the truth. And then they got to have their eyes opened and they got to use their human conscience and vote where it matters, right? To save people. So I'm hoping that we can do that in the States here with abortion, so we can eliminate and abolish abortion in the United States. That's going to have a major impact around the world as well if we do that here, just like UK had an impact around the world on the slave trade. So if we do that and we also work to eliminate human trafficking, it's going to make a difference. People will thank you in heaven for doing that. So these are things that really matter. And those are the reasons I really pay attention to politics, so that the real issues can get out there and people can, it's not about the D or the R. It's about helping real people. And we also can't, though, be fooled by the claims politicians make and their rhetoric. We can't be fooled by all that. We have to look at someone's record, look at what they really do and accomplish, and what their moral fiber is when they come to the table to write a bill, to sign a bill into law. What's their moral fiber behind that? Are they sticking to their word when they tell their voters they're going to do this and such, and then they don't do it? Like, what's going on there? So we need moral men of integrity in leadership. We don't need these kind of flaccid, high on rhetoric people with all the hype. Can't listen to all these people. You got to look at the facts behind what people are really doing and get a real glimpse of their moral fiber first before you vote them into office. And we just haven't been doing that in our country. We've been looking at all the flashy rhetoric, and if they have a D or an R, that's not what humanity is about. That's not what democracy is supposed to be about. Right? And everybody has a right to their opinion. In fact, if there's a bad politician, you want to hear their opinion so you can make sure they don't get voted in. So this whole idea of, like, on the left, that we should try to stop people from engaging in the culture war, or stop people from giving their freedom of speech, using their freedom of speech and conscience. These are not things we should be doing. So we need more cultural involvement. We need more love and, like, real work being done to help real people. Not like all this fake, oh, we're going to help people through programs and social security and all these other things that don't actually add to someone's life. Like, it's just a bunch of malarkey, So I love that term, malarkey. Just what does that even mean? Anyway, I think I got that out of the gate. Get some of that difficult stuff out of the way, you know? So, Rebecca, how about you? Have you had any media experiences this week?
Well, um, John Mark Pantana
Oh,
and LOVKN made an album together. And
mm-hmm.
they are both indie worship artists. And the album is called Childlike.
Yes.
And here's a little
Is it the bird one?
yeah, some of the animation. Um
That's cool.
yeah, it's very much this theme of our Heavenly Father and what a good father he is, and how um we become childlike to see the kingdom.
Right.
And uh anyways, I just
I
think it's
like
really
that.
cool that they did an album together. And I'm a big fan of John Mark Pantana. He's
Mm-hmm.
did a couple of albums. Um,
Love secrets.
yeah, Love Secrets was really good, and it had a book that went with it, which was really good. And but he also did one that was, I think, just called Mighty Grace, or maybe it was just called Grace. And then he has a new one, which maybe I'll talk about next week, called Sunrise.
Oh,
So I'm not as familiar with LOVKN, but John Mark Pantana is awesome. And the artist, the person who did the art for their video, is named David Pogran. And he just has some really, really cool stuff on Instagram. If you want to like look at his art on Instagram,
you said Pogran. How do you spell that?
Pogran.
Okay.
David Pogran is the artist who did a lot of that. Um, a lot of that art. Yeah, it's not showing up very well with the
It's
light
okay.
shining on it.
It's
But
really cool though. It almost looks like a kid's book, but like animated kids book.
yeah, yeah. So that's been kind of neat. A neat album to explore. I haven't quite bonded with it yet, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of interesting songs on there. It has a very playful vibe, but but still very much the tone of worship, um, in the sense of God is good and
Mm.
God is our papa and we have a good papa. And
Yeah.
so it's very sweet, very playful. Um, yeah, so
Cool. Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad you got some media experiences, not just hurricane experiences this week, but also some media experiences. Boy, what a crazy week. We couldn't find a hotel room. They were all taken up locally, so we had to stay home and like pray, God, help us to get through this and not lose power and all this stuff. And thank God he got us through it. So many people have been suffering though. But another thing that was totally miraculous was my father, his house in Tallahassee was Debbie just a month ago came through and a big tree branch went right through his roof. Like bam, like huge hole. And they had to get insurance to come out and then they put a tarp over it. They had this storm come through with a tarp. And
yeah,
I know that we and them were praying. I literally was thinking about the tarp and I imagined touching it and it felt like a rock to me. And I was
cool.
like, I think it's going to be okay.
Yeah,
It was. The tarp didn't even come off. I
neat.
mean, that's just miraculous.
Thank God.
So, I mean, God is good.
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah. So let's go on to our main subject for today.
Yeah.
So, Saint George and the Dragon is a beloved tale we have had in Christendom for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. We've talked before about myths and about the legendarium, and I have given my 2 cents on it and said that well, my way into understanding myth was Santa Claus. Well, St. George is another great, great example, like Santa Claus, of how myth works. It's just really great. And the fact that nobody has really made a serious movie, I don't know if any movie has been made about St. George and the Dragon at all. But it's so ripe for this kind of story to to hit the theaters because I mean it's got everything. It's got like a beautiful princess, it's got like a warring knight, it's got like a dragon, it's got like a village under siege by this dragon, right? So where did this story come from? Like it's amazing. Well, I was watching YouTube. Like I've seen stories. There's actually some great kid stories about it. Don't we have one of those? It's got great pictures, and it's
Yeah.
just a very well told story. In some ways, very simple, but in other ways, it's got like what you might call symbolic nuance to it. So, and this is the thing, right? Comparing it to Santa Claus, you can see how you can compare them because when you look at the original story of St. George, it almost appears to be nothing like like a guy fighting a dragon. Almost nothing.
Yeah.
This is not true though, right? Like Santa Claus, you have to look for the ways that it compares, where the places where it intersects with reality. And so the places where the actual story of St. George intersects with reality is really mind-bogglingly amazing. Like this is a period of great persecution in the church. His story happened, I think, in 230 something, maybe. No, late 200s to the point where he died in 303. So I believe he died in 303, but in the late 200s, he was a great general. He was greatly respected by Caesar. And I believe was it Dionysius? I don't remember the name of this Caesar, um, Diocletian, or I don't remember. Could have been Diocletian, but like this was a great time of persecution, and there was a debate happening in Rome about whether or not there should be a lot of violence towards Christianity or not. Like, what's the proper answer to all these crazy Christians running around? They won't listen to you know, they won't engage in paganism and they won't worship Caesar and treat him as a god, right? And so, you can see that Rome carried with it a lot of the previous empires, a lot of these bad habits that previous empires had, which was the worship of their ruler, like Alexander the Great, the worship of Alexander the Great as a god, right? And the Persian king as well. So Rome like acquired this same bad habit of saying, "Yup, I'm amazing. You should bow down to me, and if you don't, then you're an enemy of the state." Right? And so Rome, at least similarly to Alexander the Great, had this. Well, Persia kind of did the same thing. So all these empires, in a way, did something similar where they would conquer people and then they would kind of tolerate their gods, right? The idea was like, no, you can continue worshiping your religion as long as you also add our emperor or our Caesar to the mix. You have to also bow down to them. As long as you do that, then I'm okay with you. And of course, Christians just did not tolerate this. Why? Oh, why would these
Mhm.
silly Christians not to tolerate this and just say, okay, I will be left alone to practice my religion as long as I bow to Caesar, or burn incense to Apollo or whatever. And gee, why is that? Why, how could that be? Why couldn't Christians just leave well enough alone? Because it's part of our faith, guys. Part of our faith. And a lot of people might get offended at this. Good. Part of our faith is about the truth. Who is God truly? Who is the one true God? Don't you think if we're going to worship something, we should at least worship something that's worthy of being worshiped? Don't you think that if you worship something dumb like a frog or something, you're kind of degrading yourself and saying maybe the human being has a little bit of dignity and is here for a purpose, you know? And in our in part of our faith, we believe that we were born in the image of God. We were made in the image of God. So this gives us a measure of dignity, right? Because it's not to say that we're gods at all. It's to say that we came from God, and not only came from God, but God made us in his image. And so this gives us, like, out of honor for God, we also honor the image of God. We treat each other with dignity and respect, right? Marriage is similar. Marriage is a representation of the partnership between God and man. And so as we treat that relationship with dignity, we also have to treat our husband and wife with dignity, don't we? So these things are representations of a deeper truth. And so we have to treat the human being with great dignity and respect. And this is revealed in scripture, right? So we shouldn't be bowing down and worshiping just some dude, right? Just because they will beat us up if we don't. That's just not how truth works, right? So truth is just not debatable once you get to it. Try to convince me all you want, but if I don't agree with you, oh Caesar, sorry, not going to bow down to you. And so the truth is, certain people have convictions, and they have those convictions because they've been changed as a person. They've seen the light, they've seen the truth, right? They've had this sort of enlightenment of truth, and real values come from that, right? And so the values that St. George had was the value of honoring and respecting God as God. He was not going to bow to Caesar because he believed in the one true God. And the one true God does not tolerate that stuff. He wants you to honor yourself, honor your body by not bowing to some creepy crawler in the ground, or not bowing to some evil spirit, or not bowing down to some gilded idol, right? No, he doesn't want you to do that. He wants you, because in parts of scripture it says, oh, they bow to wooden idols and they become like them, right? He doesn't want us to become like a wooden idol that can't do anything, can't breathe, can't talk, can't go anywhere.
Mm.
He doesn't want us to become like that.
Yeah.
Right? So you become what you admire. You become like what you admire. So an idol is like an ideal, right? Which is a lot of the reason the Greeks always sculpted the ideal human body. It was an ideal to strive for, you know? And so, like, when the Israelites worshipped a golden calf, it was because a calf represented productivity, right? It represented like blessing from nature. And they weren't trying to become a cow. they were worshiping this ideal for their society. And that ideal represented productivity. They wanted to be productive and have food and have shelter and all these great things. And so that was like an image or a representation of the ideal culture that they wanted. So similarly, right, with these empires, St. George became a Christian and he realized, I cannot bow to a false god. I just can't do it. But more than that, here's where I get to like where the reality and the story, the myth, intersect. It intersects in the sense that he is a mighty military general. And he understands commitment. He understands self-sacrifice. He understands the battle and what the battle is about, right? There's a certain point in every battle, especially if that battle gets a little hairy, a little difficult, right? There's a special point at which you must commit yourself completely to your decisions as a general. And if you do not, you will not survive. But if you do, sure, you might die as well, but you increase your chances of survival because you're acting with boldness, right? And so generals that act with boldness, with strength, with surety, with confidence, often will make it through these difficult times, right? They become more confident in their thinking. So, where did St. George do this? Where did he demonstrate that he was a great general? Well, this is really about a spiritual battle, not a physical battle. This story is about the fact that I believe it was called the Plutarch or the moment in which there were 4 Caesars over the kingdom, and there were 2 of them there, and they wrote this law that they would execute Christians, right, if they didn't bow down to Caesar. And so when St. George saw this, he prayed and he knew that it was his time. He knew that he had to commit to the battle. And this was a spiritual battle. So what did that mean? It meant he went to the church, he gave all of his possessions away, and he got ready to suffer for God spiritually. He prayed and was ready to die for God. And then I think he was following the Holy Spirit. He went to outside where the Caesars were. They were both there. And the announcement, he took the announcement off the wall. He went into them and he ripped the bill up, the announcement. And he said, I am a worshiper of Jesus Christ. And so he was willing at that moment to suffer. And he did it in front of everyone at the, I think that they were in the, in front of the Senate or something. And so, of course, he was going to suffer because you don't just do that in front of Caesar. But he was also highly respected as a general. And so they were going to try to coax him. Instead of just killing him around the spot, they were going to try to coax him and make an example of him in front of everyone. And that's perfect for the situation. Because who has more confidence about what they believe in? St. George or these Caesars? Who has more confidence? So we're going to find out. So guess what happened? They took him through a whole gamut of torture devices. And I'm not saying St. George didn't feel all that pain, but there was one torture device in which they put him on a wheel and they spun him around and he got cut by a bunch of blades all over his body. And he went over and it was like he didn't know if he was going to survive. And then something happened. A booming voice said, "I am with you." And I think it said, like, "Do not worry, I am with you," or something like that. And the important phrase, though, there was, "I am with you." Is that God was with him. Jesus was with him. And he's going over all of these blades. Well, after that happened, all of his wounds healed immediately.
Wow.
And they took him over it again and it did nothing to him. It was like
Wow.
he was made of iron. And then they gave him many other torture devices and it did nothing to him. And they even put him in acid. They did they have a lot of techniques over there, guys, in Rome. These are the kind of things they think about. And so none of these things harmed or killed him after that. And so now they're going to try to plead with him. Well, they have to figure out what kind of sorcery he's using to keep from getting harmed. What kind of sorcery, St. George? George, are you using? This is not fair. So they call in a sorcerer or somebody who knows about these things, and they're like, well, we're going to give you these vials. One is poison that will kill you, and the other is a concoction that will just drive you insane, but you'll live. And so St. George prays, and then he just dunks both of them. He's like, I'll just take both of them. I don't care. Doesn't do anything to him, right? He's not insane. He's not killed by this. Oh, they're pleading with him, right? They bring him to the temple temple of Apollo. And they're like, if only you would burn incense to Apollo, you will have all these beautiful things, because there's a bunch of beautiful people there that are there to seduce you and bring you into all the evil things they do in paganism, right? Sexual sin and murdering babies and all these things. But you'll be able to have all this wealth and all this, you're thinking of like Christ in his temptation in the desert, right? When Satan is like, I'll give you all these kingdoms and all these, if only you would just worship me, right? He's like, I won't do it. And guess what happens right after that? The statue of Apollo breaks in half and falls to the ground. That doesn't just happen.
Yeah.
So now everyone's freaking out in the temple, and the temple priests are like, take him away. They don't want him to break any more statues.
Mhm. Yeah.
That would have been great. He could break all of them. And then they bring him back and they try to torture him even more. But they're like, okay, we can't keep doing this, because why? Because the more they do this, the more St. George's men and many of the other, especially military men, start to also stand with him and say, I'm going to become a Christian too. So they're literally converting more people the more they try to harm him. So they have to be like, okay, we're done with it. We got to just immediately kill him. So he prays and thanks God that he could suffer this way. And then they take him outside the city walls and they behead him. And that was it. But that wasn't it. You know why? Because 10 years later, 10 years, Constantine is now Caesar and he makes it legal for Christians to worship. So where does this intersect with the reality? The reality is he went through a great battle with a dragon and he slayed it. And that dragon was Roman paganism. He just chopped it up. And yes, he did die. He did suffer a great deal, as is in the story of St. George, right? He suffered a great deal with this dragon. In the story, they make it seem in the story, in the myth, right, for kids, there's moments in that battle with the dragon in which what? He's almost rendered completely still and death-like, right? That symbolizes his actual death. And what? As Christians, we have life everlasting. So on the second part of that story, when the dragon gets killed, which happens 10 years after his death, paganism gets killed and destroyed. So you can see then that when you include the spiritual realm in this story, it's the same story.
Yeah.
St. George fought, right, with his body against this thing, and it couldn't defeat him, right? It had to give up. We're done trying to convince you. I can't do it anymore. You keep defeating us, and more people get convicted of their sin and they become Christians as well, right? And we just come off as cruel and terrible. And so this is what happens when paganism comes against Christianity. It fails because they don't have convictions for what they're doing. They're just doing it because they love sin and they love the flesh. That's why they're doing it. And they want to make a fool of other people, sure, and take physical supremacy over you. But like, the grave can't hold these people. Christ is the true God, and paganism is defeated. So this is the story. This is what these myths do. They reveal the truth. When you include the spirit part of this story, this is the truth. Pagan Romanism was destroyed.
Yeah.
Right? And so this is the kind of story we need to tell. And so, there's symbols here that are very important as part of it. And I think, one of the things you can do, for example, is with these myths, and this is what happened also with Santa Claus, right? Because as the Santa myth went along, somebody latched onto it, right? In like the 16, 1700s, 1800s, right? And they expanded the story. They expanded it in a certain direction, right? Because it made sense to do that. And so a very giving Christian man becomes somebody who gives to so many more people because of his initial, sacrifice. And so this is true with this story as well, because he gave his life there in that singular moment. And then 10 years later, the results of that are seen. Well, how many more results have we seen from that? Where paganism has been defeated around the globe, right? And now it has to go underground. And it can't be so overt anymore the way it used to be. Because the philosophy of it is dull. So it's dulled to the senses. We don't see the use of that philosophy now. And so it's destroyed that dragon. But like, one of the thoughts I had, and you can tell me what you think of this, honey, because this is the attempt for me is to bring this into the modern day, because there are still elements of paganism we can see today. And those elements, to me, combine with things like statism, combine with things like feminism, combine with with things like in the church, in the false church, right? And so, because here's what I see in the myth, there's a town, right? That town is this princess's village, right? And it's like I think some people depict it as like a small, not a kingdom, but like it's got a little tiny, a little castle, right? And so there is some, it's a large village, right? It's not just a little tiny village. It's enough to where, I mean, she's a princess, right? So it's like, it's enough to where there's a real culture here going on. And another reason that I think that's important is that we have to think, why is this dragon here? Right? If the dragon represents Rome, that's something a little more substantial than a village, isn't it? But with the myth, what I imagine is that we have to think about why the dragon came there to haunt and destroy and terrify this local community. Why did that happen? And here's my answer. Similarly to Rome, similarly to our current issues, this dragon represents paganism, true, but it represents it in today's version, right? It represents, to me, the father, who in some versions was killed and in other versions was trapped in the castle, and the dragon would kind of basically like keep them in there, in and kind of terrorize them. And so they were like stuck in this castle, and then she was sent out to go find help. And so the village is being terrorized essentially. Not everyone's being killed and whatever, but it's enough terror happening to where they need to get rid of this dragon because it's it's causing a lot of damage to the village, but it's not causing the kind of damage that kills everybody, right? Because what? Because it represents a spiritual power. And spiritual power doesn't necessarily kill everybody. What it does is it changes everybody into bad, evil things who kind of serve the dragon. And terrorizing them is part of that, right? That's how you turn people bad, is you terrorize them, make them afraid of you, dominate them, tyrannize them, right? Abuse them, and then they become your little slaves, right? And so that to me is what her village represents. They're held under this slave kind of control. And my belief is that some of this stuff, I don't know how much I want to say, but because some of this is a little bit controversial. But
Would you like me to put my 2 cents in just to give you a minute?
sure.
Okay. Um, what if the dragon is self?
Mm-hmm.
And with paganism is really kind of like this idea that you can get what you want from the gods by manipulating the gods or something, rather than giving, like in Christianity, we give our lives to God, and then
Mm-hmm.
He becomes what we want. And in Him, we want for nothing. We're fully satisfied. But paganism and idolatry is much more like self-motivated, and certain topics, like I think maybe you're about to mention, like within the church, like
Yeah,
there's a lot of like, I would call like self-righteousness, self
absolutely.
like do it yourself salvation, and
Self-help
that
stuff. Mm-hmm.
plays in as well with feminism, where there's this idea of like, I'm, it's just
Right.
self-focused.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, St. George slaying the dragon, um,
It's a
it's
repudiation of self.
Yeah, yeah, he's
Yeah.
destroying self in the church,
Mm-hmm.
um, and just proclaiming Christ as king. Um, that's kind of what I get out of it, to modernize this
Yeah.
the myth of it.
Well, the way it would look to me is that the king and possibly the queen, and then also, well, I don't want to reveal that, but like the king and the queen possibly represent the selfish church then. And they inadvertently, like they didn't as many people are, right? We do things we don't realize the consequences of those actions. Eve biting the apple, for example, we do things we don't realize that because we're just thinking of ourselves, we're actually calling a dragon to our village. And, and then the dragon is possessing us or terrorizing us or abusing us because we have opened our lives to sin.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of how that works anyway. And so the great thing about this kind of nuance is that it's not just about blaming the dragon, right? It's not just about us going, "Oh, that's wily serpent tricked me to eat the fruit," you know? No, I mean, sure, the dragon gets punished, but God doesn't just punish the dragon, he punishes Adam and Eve. They allowed the dragon to have this impact. And, so they're partially to blame. And so I really think that that's going to add more nuance and add more understanding of not just like, oh, this is how you defeat a dragon. You have to be brave, you have to train, you have to put self away and be willing to die for this cause, right? That's St. George's struggle. But more than that, we have to understand, how did the dragon get there in the first place? Don't ignore that. You're going to just have more dragons, right? In other villages. So how did we get kicked out of the Garden of Eden? Right? We entertained this kind of evil, these kind of evil thoughts. And then we only thought of ourselves. We didn't think of others. And so this is how these things happen. And so adding some nuance to this story like that, I think is very smart. It doesn't take away from the original story. Obviously, we want to, because one of the things about the St. George myth is that I actually think Santa Claus in some ways is still fairly close to the original story because this great well of gifts giving is present, right? And so that's very important. In the St. George story, I think we have to also have this strong connection to self sacrifice and spiritual battle, spiritual war as a theme, right? And so you have to really maintain these strong themes in your story. And I also think that symbolically, all the things St. George went through there, whether it's torture or what have you, need to be symbolized in his battle with the dragon. Because I want to um, actually draw people to seeing the symbolic power of each one of those moments. And so they're doing it now with a dragon facing him, but it's just as powerful, right? Because in some ways you could say, oh, but the dragon's so much more interesting. A dragon and a knight, that's so cool. But think about the original story. That was just as powerful in many ways. He's facing Caesar. He's saying no, and a statue of Apollo is getting broken in half. I mean, that's really dramatic. It's powerful. Christ is like, I am with you, you know? So this St. George needs to be on the ground And you hear the booming voice, I am with you, with this dragon looming over him, right? Now you've got a stronger connection with the original story.
Yeah.
And where does that voice come from? Just like the original story. We don't know. Well, as Christians, we do. We know exactly where that voice is coming from. So when you're seeing a movie like that, you get to also identify with that. I know where that voice is coming from,
Mhm.
right? And so you feel it on that more visceral level. And then when St. George is being attacked by a dragon's claws and teeth and fire, right? It's like a torturing device. It has to be done like a torturing device. So the dragon has to have this sort of maliciousness to him, where he's like, I've got you, you can't get away, and now I'm going to torture you. He's not just a beast, he's a malicious beast, right? So it's revealing the spirit of this evil dragon, which was from the original story. So, this is how you can bring out these themes and how you can honor the original tale, you know, and not all of that stuff is in the myth. So, I think if you enhance the myth to make more connections with the original, you'll actually come up with an even stronger depiction of St. George. So, we need to do that because Europe still admires and loves St. George for good reason. But many people in Europe don't know why St. George is such a great character. And they don't have a connection with him anymore, quite often, I think. And so they need to understand that, hey, many of you guys in Europe, you're playing with spirits that you don't understand in paganism. And you think you understand what you're doing, and you don't. This is a dragon that will eat you happily. And so St. George is someone that teaches us what true living and goodness and self-sacrifice is about. True love is about. And so his love for the princess, right, and for the villagers by extension, is the same love that God has for us, and the same love that the martyr has for us when he gives his life in our stead. Many other Christians in Rome benefited, and around the empire benefited from his sacrifice. And does St. George know all that? No, he just loves Jesus. And this is the same thing it is for many of us Christians today. It isn't just that we love you, we love Jesus, and he teaches us how to love. He teaches us how to give. We don't know what to do. We just love him. And then he teaches us what to do. And this is what moves mountains. Jesus said we would do even greater things than him and move mountains. This is the kind of mountain he's talking about, guys. He's talking about a serious mountain in the soul of the dark soul of so many people around the world who are darkened. They've had their door darkened by a dragon. And they don't realize the end result of that is paganism and death and murder and evil. And so they need this representation in their lives, somebody who has the bravery and the love and the understanding to give of themselves. People don't know what love is anymore. They think it's just some nice feelings. It's not. It's giving like St. George. So these are the kind of myths that we need to be making. Not some chick flick on Pureflix. We don't need that. We need St. George's, guys. We need people who know what love is. It's not love to give your bride a new Escalade. That's not love. Love is being willing to sacrifice your life for somebody, right? So if you ladies want a romance novel, right? That's boring, guys. What you want is St. George. This is the real man who knows what's right. He knows that people need saving sometimes. And we need saving too. Sometimes we get saved by giving, right? So this kind of self-sacrifice is just all from Christ. It's just all from him. He teaches us how to do it. We just follow in his footsteps. He says, carry your cross and follow me. What does that mean? That's exactly what it means. What St. George did. Carry his cross and followed him. Right? So it's just a different torture device this time. So when you have that kind of love for somebody, nothing's going to stop you. So let's get some investment funds to make St. George and the Dragon. We'll do it right this time. Why? Because we actually understand the myth. We actually understand the original story. And we actually understand that the world needs this kind of bright, shining light to give people hope. The screen you watch a movie on is supposed to be a bright, shining light of hope. It's not supposed to give you depression or something, or bore you. It's supposed to be a shining light of hope for generations of people.
Yeah.
You can't do that without an inspiring story like St. George. These are the kind of stories that matter. So, and think of all the built-in audience, guys. And all the ladies. Oh, that's a man. Right? There's a princess and a dude, and they do what, she's fighting for her people. It's not like she's a dullard. She's fighting for her people, and she finds the right man. He's the right guy.
Yeah.
Why? Because he's willing to sacrifice. And she senses this in him. She knows it's going to have to take some guy like this to defeat this dragon. It's not that hard to figure that out. But you have to have an instinct, right, for that. So, what do you think, honey?
Yeah, let's make this move.
Pretty exciting.
Yeah. It's a good story.
Yeah.
I love the stories of the martyrs, and I love the stories of people, laying it all down for the sake of Christ.
Yeah. And that's why sometimes why you need these myths, right? Because it's like, we know what he's doing. Other people just get to watch a cool story of a knight defeating a dragon. And then there's these moments of like, why is that there? Right?
Yeah.
These are little hints for you to look it up on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Why does it say I'm with you? Who's that? What's going on there? Why is he being tortured in this way by the dragon? What kind of dragon is this? Oh, look it up. Now you know that there's Christians who are willing to be martyred for their faith. And that's what this is about. If are you missing something in your life? Some real meaning, conviction, real love, real relationships? Somebody that you're willing to suffer and die for? To give your life meaning? Well, have I got the story for you? So people need this. We were talking about the difference between paganism this morning and like the more aggressive religions like Islam and communism and Hinduism and some of these other more aggressive faiths that will like chop your head off, for getting in their way. And we're talking about how, you know, St. George defeated paganism, but paganism was being given an opportunity to look at itself and go, oh, are we really these kinds of people? And then go, we really shouldn't be these kinds of people, you know? And it really it's a moment to get you to really think about what your religion is really about, and why you're doing what you're doing. And that's, I think, very real that that's how he defeated paganism, is because that's what these pagans needed to see, to see really the fruit of this faith, what it's about. And these other religions need something, I think, a little more nuanced and small, you know, than just a bunch of martyrs being willing to die. I could be wrong, but like these other faiths, because one of the things we've seen in Islam is that in the last 10 years or so, that people have been seeing Christ in their dreams. And so this is a clue to me, because what this says is that there's the quiet conscience when you're by yourself and you get to say, what do I really care about? Do I really, like, why am I doing the things I'm doing? And so in your quiet moments, you get to kind of like contemplate these things. They're not in the loud, boisterous moments of fighting and aggression, right? They're the moments of quiet contemplation, or when you're in nature, or when you're sleeping, or when you are daydreaming, or when you're, watching, listening to music or something. You know what I mean? These quiet moments of just like silent contemplation. And then you see God in something, like the true God. And he tells you that he loves you. Like, and you don't need to be doing all these other things. Like these are moments, I think, for more violent religions in which they get to say, oh, like, did I just become this because I was being violently coerced? Maybe I don't actually believe that. So these are moments in culture when you get to kind of like see the result of these thoughts and beliefs, and you get to see them acted out in real life. And then you get to kind of like contemplate later and go, what do I really believe? You know? And so I see that in these stories of people who dream of Christ, and that these are the quiet moments that matter quite often. So who knows, maybe another story, not St. George, maybe, who knows, but another story will have that impact in that world as well. And we get to talk about, like, as Christian artists and culture creators, what is God telling you about these things? And how can you speak to people of other cultures and of other beliefs and of other, in other places in the world? And I think that the one thing that the American faith-based film industry, I think, doesn't do very well is we're not trying to send films around the world that speak to different cultures. Have you noticed that? We just talk about the American, like, American experience.
Yeah.
Some dude in small town, USA. Like, how does this speak to somebody in India or in China or Kazakhstan or Mozambique? Like, how does this speak to them?
Right.
You know? Yeah, I'm not even saying it. I'm not even saying it has to do with, you know, the lifestyle or the westernness of it. It's just the people, the things that they care about, right? That's the stuff we should be talking about. Like, let's talk to this person about what they care about,
Yeah.
you know? And so these small moments are moments when you can just kind of like honestly, quietly, kind of like Elijah in the mountain, right? Just God was in the still small voice.
Yeah.
He wasn't in the raging fire or the wind, you know. He was in that still small voice. This is speaking through culture. This is how culture can speak to people. And when we in the church are just ignoring all of this impact we could be having through storytelling and in the culture, we're really dropping the ball. I mean, we're sending missionaries when we could be sending films.
Mm.
That could be a lot cheaper and easier. I don't
Yeah.
know if money is what you're thinking about, which you shouldn't be, but you should be thinking about what God is asking you to do. What if God is asking you to just make a movie and send it to some country? What if he's asking you to do that? Why aren't we thinking about it like that? I've never heard anyone talk about that. You know? So, um, St. George is a European, distinctly early church tale. And so, think of the audience that this can reach. This was 2,000 years ago. This story is still around. Why? Because you go to any town square in Europe, you might see a statue of St. George with a spear through a dragon. Why do you think that's there? These people are not daft. They know what this is about. Maybe some people need to be reminded. Sure. Well, Americans do. And there's lots of people around the world who have never heard the tale, possibly, but they need tales told to them like this that have meaning, you know, and that can talk to them in that still small voice,
Yeah.
About what's really important, what is real love, what is real sacrifice, you
Yeah.
know? I don't know. That's what I think about.
Yeah.
So we'll wrap it up. But were there any other thoughts you had, Rebecca?
It's a great story. It's an inspiring story.
Another week of cultural warfare. We get, where I know earlier in the conversation I was talking about Matt Walsh and stuff, but like I find that so few people understand culture war. Like they just don't understand that this is a political term and understand that, when you're talking about politics today, this is another aspect I didn't even mention. But when you're talking about politics today, you're talking about two sides of the same coin. You're talking about what's called the Hegelian dialectic. Remember how we talked about this?
Yeah.
And I think you even said it blew your mind and you didn't know.
Yeah.
But like the Hegelian dialectic is a purposeful narrative that's basically injected into the political process in
Mm.
which you have one side of the aisle that's supposed to say these things and the other side of the aisle is supposed to say these things. That's what, a dialectic really is. And so they're supposed to battle it out with each other until what? How do you know when they're done? When they have communism.
Mhm.
And the right wing or the left wing could lead you there. Both of them could lead you there. But if you don't follow the dialectic, they're not happy. They want you to follow the dialectic. They want you to choose one of the sides. And these sides are meant to be extreme. They're meant to be get more and more and more extreme, right? And so what did you see in fascist Germany is you saw a lot of people, they just focus on the fascist side of it, right? What they don't focus on is that 10 years and 20 years before fascism, it was very communist. Communism was very popular. Talking about communism and Marxism was very popular. And then it became a very decadent society and kind of gross socially. And that was called the Weimar Republic in Germany. And then there was a backlash to all that decadence. And that backlash was fascism, which is supposed to be about, no, we're more conservative. We're going to bring things back to normalcy. We're going to like care about, instead of just caring about worldwide communism, we're going to care about our nation. Just get our nation back on track. Goodness gracious. And if we just get all these corporations on board and everything, we're going to be super rich. We're going to be super powerful. It's going to be great. That's exactly what they did. That was the right wing Hegelian dialectic. And you know why they gained so much power so quickly? Because it was a pendulum swing to the right, because it had gone so far to the left, they pendulum swinged far to the right in response to the dialectic. So the more people do this and they fight back and forth, but they don't pay attention that this is maybe not the direction they should be going in. It's too extremist. It's too much heated rhetoric. Anyway, my point is a lot of people don't realize that they're just engaging in this dialectic. They're not really thinking for themselves. And they're not really thinking about what's right for their own country. They're thinking about, well, this is popular to talk about this, so we'll talk about that. Or this is where the candidate's going, so I'll just go where the candidate is going. Right? Instead of being like, well, what's really best for the country? The Hegelian dialectic in a way represents a pendulum swing back and forth and back and forth. And I literally like got blocked by James Lindsay because on X, because I was like starting to get critical of him because he wasn't actually like understanding that he was starting to engage in a right-wing Hegelian dialectic. And I was like, dude, why are you just supporting the right side of it? You can't just follow the pendulum swing back and forth. You have to break the pendulum or at least stay in the middle, right? It's not about like being a moderate or a centrist or whatever. It's about understanding that real people need real things solved. So when you're just rational about that, you're going to be staying in the middle somewhere. But like, so, I'm not saying Matt Walsh is a fascist and these other guys are communists. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that let's think outside of that box. Let's think outside of this, just the duopoly, like the reds and the blues, the Republicans and the Democrats, the this and the good and the evil, the black and the white. It's too simple, guys. It's too simple. It's not nuanced like real life. Real life is just far more nuanced than that. So we gotta stay out of that well-trodden path of nonsense rhetoric in DC. Maybe try to get outside of that and you'll get better perspective. Why are they doing this? Things will start to make more sense. So, but instead, we're getting on this whole like, let's just do whatever they're doing. It's not good for you. So that's a little bit of my 2 cents, but we love you guys and thanks for listening and thanks for putting up with all my nonsense rhetoric and politicking. And this is not a political show, but I am proud of Matt Walsh. I think he did a good job with this documentary and Am I Racist? And it really raises some good questions. And I would say the same thing if it was on the left and there was a good documentary. So But what I want to see is just more open-mindedness to these things, less heated rhetoric where people are like, you can't say that. Like, dude, this is America. People can say a lot. People should be saying more things than they're saying now. It just doesn't have to be so heated. So thank you guys, and thanks for waiting, because I know it's super late now, and appreciate you. And stand up for the culture.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys next week, and you already know how to get a hold of us. So, all right. Good night, everybody.